I'm a male and was 22 when this story occurred. The encounter happened when I moved back to my hometown after graduating. At first, I had to move back in with my parents until I found a job. It was great at first seeing more of my parents, as I hadn't seen them much studying in a different city, but the novelty soon started to wear off, and I was missing the independence I had living in my own apartment when I was away. Well, I found a job, and after a few months, I decided that I was going to find my own place and regain my independence. I began searching online and was looking at both agencies and private landlords, scoping around for places that were within my budget. I had gone for a few viewings that I turned down as they weren't what I was looking for. Then it happened. I came across an ad online for a place with a great location, and it was within my budget. The ad had contact details for Alan, with a standard-looking email address. I email Alan and find out that the place is still available. I'm psyched, and we arrange a viewing. Alan doesn't work or live in the town and won't be able to meet before 7:30 p.m. No problem, we can both do it the next night. So I show up to the address. It looks just like the photos from the outside, and I'm getting more excited and can't believe my luck. I knock on the door and a large man opens it. This guy was towering over me, easily 6'4". He almost looks disappointed as he extends his hand. I'm Andy. Alan on the ad. Not a red flag yet. Could just be that he doesn't like advertising his real name. As I shake his hand and say he responds, "I thought you'd be a girl. I have a unisex name." At this point, I'm assuming he prefers women, as they tend to be considered tidier than guys. I tell him, "Don't worry, I'm quite OCD with my living space. Like to keep it clean." He just kind of nods, still looking a bit disappointed, but it's as if he's trying to mask it. He uninterestedly shows me around the place. I actually really love it so far, but anytime I show my interest, it almost seems like he's trying to put me off. For example, I told him that I loved the big windows, and he responded by telling me they can be drafty. I'm still brushing this off as him thinking I won't be as clean as a female tenant. We finish looking around the place, and I tell him that I'm really interested in renting, but first I want to see the basement, as it was advertised with spacious basement in the listing. He states that there is no basement. I just look at him confused and point out that it's stated on the ad, and there's a door in the apartment he didn't open during the tour, which I'm assuming is the basement entrance. He's beginning to act a bit sketch and says that he's reconsidering including the basement and that he's going to use it for storage instead. The basement was a big positive to me on the ad, as I pictured man caving it or throwing parties down there with friends. As the flat is in my budget, I say I would really like to see the basement, and if I liked it, we could possibly work something out, like me paying extra to include the space with the rent. He seems unsure, but as I'm being adamant, he finally relents and says he'll show me, but he has to go down first and tidy up. At this point, I'm reconsidering hanging around, as this strikes me as a red flag. But at the same time, he said he was going to use it for storage instead, so I figure maybe it's just a bit untidy. I decide to wait. Andy disappears into the dark basement, and I'm waiting for the light to flicker on when he reaches the bottom of the stairs, but it stays dark, and I hear some shuffling around for a minute or so, and then the light comes on and he shouts that I can go down. I begin to get a really uneasy feeling and am considering leaving, but I brush it off because I do still really dig this apartment. I head down the stairs and I reach the turn in the stairs near the bottom when Andy perks up. "Watch your feet." That's when I look down and notice it. There's a thin line of that plastic kind of clear wire stretched across the stairs. You know, the kind that's used for washing lines. It runs across about ankle height right before the bend and is tied around at the ends and secured by screws. He notices the "what the fuck" look on my face and quickly chimes in that the last tenant had a dog and he painted models or something down there. The wire was apparently there to keep the dog out, and he hasn't had a chance to remove it yet. Pretty flimsy excuse, especially considering the ad said no pets. I'm thinking the only reason he didn't remove it was because I was at the top of the stairs and would have seen. Obviously, at this point alarm bells are ringing, so I don't wander far from the bottom of the stairs. Andy says, "Well, here it is," and a minute later is quickly trying to rush me back up the stairs. Relieved, all I see down there is boxes and a tied-up bin liner. Typical storage stuff. No weird smell or anything, just a normal-looking basement. But then I notice it. In the corner, just as I turn to go back upstairs. An old mattress, poorly propped up in the far corner, with a sheet covering it. But you can see the bottom corner. And it's clear what it is. It looked like he tried to hide it with the sheet, but couldn't see it in the dark. We head back up the stairs, me leading, and I remember to step over the wire. Andy immediately closes the door, and when we're back up says, "Well, get in touch if you want the place, and maybe we can work something out about the basement." He's acting super sketchy at this point, and I can tell he wants me out right away, so I tell him, "Sure, it's a lovely place. I'll be in touch. Nice meeting you." I'm quickly ushered out. I called my best friend when I left and told him what happened, and that I'm worried Andy is planning on luring a girl down there, tripping her on the stairs, and doing God knows what. He says maybe I'm being paranoid, but it does sound sketchy as fuck. I decide better safe than sorry, and call the police station on the non-emergency number that night and explain what happened. The police thank me and say they'll check it out, but don't sound very sincere. I expect to hear a follow-up. Nothing. I call back a week later to inquire, and am told they can't release any information. I keep an eye on local news, and nothing comes up that sounds like Andy. The advertisement did get removed the next day, though. Maybe I put him off the idea. Maybe it was me being paranoid and there never was anything malicious afoot. Or maybe Andy followed through with his plan, and was never caught.
Hello, I just want to unburden a bit something that has been bothering me a lot. I'm a 21-year-old female and I work as a cashier in a supermarket. There's a lot of guys in there that try to hit on me. I just ignore them or stare at them blankly until they go away. I've been asked for my phone number, email, if I live alone or not. There was even a guy that kept telling me how beautiful I was until I snapped out and told him that I didn't like it. I never saw him again since that. Anyways, there's now another guy. This guy is old and has around 68 years, I guess. He was pretty nice to me. He has one of those faces of gentle, nice people that you can just get along. One time he told me he was going to get surgery and, well, being nice, I told him good luck, that everything would be okay. Worst mistake ever. Since then, he doesn't leave me alone. He goes to see me every day in my work hours, sometimes not even buying anything and placing himself in line just to tell me hello. He already made small talk trying to ask for my number, which I pretended I didn't understand, and tried to wait for me outside of work to chat with me. He didn't, because I go on to another way on a co-worker's parking lot only. Now he asked me what is my car. I didn't even answer him, and then he kinda blowed me a kiss. What the hell? My encounters with him are becoming a huge source of anxiety. I know he's just an old guy, but believe me or not, I already was submitted to a spinal surgery that left me in bed for a year straight, making me lose a lot of muscle and being really fragile right now. I can't even shrug a woman out of my way, and despite him being old, I'm scared. I wouldn't have the strength to defend myself. The encounters don't last that long. It's always while I'm working and I can't even throw him an answer to leave me alone. At this moment, I just want to have the opportunity to confront him face to face and tell him to fuck off. But I don't know how. I'm even getting scared now to go to the co-worker's parking lot because I work at night and there's no lights there. I'm afraid the creep is gonna follow me. I've been coming home always looking at my rear to see if I'm being followed. I'm scared. I'm not a brave person. And I don't have any strength to do shit. It sucks to work with people like this.
So, this happened to me when I was 12 years old. One night, I was sleeping in my room. It was the summer, so I had my window open a bit. I was sleeping in my boxers and didn't use blankets since it was extremely hot. Anyways, it was hard to sleep, so I was gonna go up and get some ice water. And when I opened my eyes, there was a man looking at me, with his arm moving around under his waist, and he was breathing heavily. My mom's room was next to mine, so I knocked loudly on the wall, and in a minute or two, she came into my room and saw the man. She started yelling at the top of her lungs at him, and he ran off. She called the police, and he was found in an alleyway, finishing up what he was doing. The cops arrested him. The next day we got a call, and they told my mom that he'd been watching me sleep for a couple of weeks. He said that night was the first time he greased the pan while watching me. I no longer live there anymore. But I still hate that a man watched a younger kid sleep. Man in my window, let's not meet again.
After moving out on my own, my first apartment was a tiny efficiency in a small town in Ohio. It consisted of a kitchen, a bathroom, and another area which I used as living room and bedroom with a futon. That futon was super uncomfortable, so I set its mattress on the floor to sleep. I'd been asleep for a couple hours one night when I became sort of drowsily half-conscious. I raised my head, looked around, and laid back down. It's hard to gauge how long one has been asleep, but shortly thereafter I sat bolt up straight, wide awake, adrenaline pumping, and not sure why. I had a sense that I'd been awakened by a noise, though I couldn't exactly recall that noise. I looked towards the back of my room, and the back door was hanging wide open. I jumped up, shut the door, locked it, grabbed my baseball bat, and did a quick inspection of the tiny apartment. No one, and no signs of intrusion. I had a vague memory of seeing a figure the first time I almost woke up. but that could have easily been a false memory to fit my later suspicions. The funny thing is, this all had a very rational explanation. A few days later, in the middle of the day, I noticed the back door would tend to not shut all the way when I closed it, but to stick just before it latched. The wind would then blow it up later, and the figure I thought I saw was probably a coat on my coat hanger. But just in case there was someone in my apartment that night, let's never meet.
This happened in Antioch, California. It was around 2 a.m. I was at a friend's house, safe in warm, sheltered suburbia. We were having a lot to drink, chit-chatting, and enjoying ourselves. Of course, when you're having fun, time hits the fast-forward button, and those few minutes turn into an hour. I had too much to drink. My friend has a bit of an abrupt bedtime, so I had to dodge out early, still intoxicated. I felt too shameful thinking I'd be asking too much to stay in his house to sleep off the drunkenness. I suppose he was either too rude or too drunk to consider it himself. Whatever. Sometimes a little inconvenience makes you appreciate everything else. I needed about another hour or so to sober up and drive back. As fast as time passed during my stay, it decided to drastically slow down as soon as I stepped out of his house. It was a cul-de-sac area, a concrete jungle with the stem of the street breaking into a fork. Alongside the road, my car was parked. The only streetlight that worked was in the middle of the cul-de-sac circle, about 80 yards away. I stumbled towards my car, produced my keys, felt the metal line up, opened my door, and shifted to the back seat. Because this was a dark, strange, and unfamiliar neighborhood, I took the leftover newspapers and a sweater in my back seat to cover myself up. Admittedly, I was a little scared. I wanted to camouflage myself and not just be some guy awkwardly sitting in his car waiting for time to pass in order to drive home. I couldn't fall asleep. The uncomfortable feeling of a cheap back seat enshrouded in darkness didn't make the chance of slumber easier. It felt too ominous. And of course, my mind began to wander. I began to think of worst-case scenarios, like how the police would shine their lights on me through the window, or a drunk driver hitting my car, and... wait. In the distance, about 100 yards away, I could hear footsteps approaching. The gravel scuffed with each step forward, growing in proximity, but periodically taking stops. I wondered why, until it began to make sense in my mind. Whoever it was probably looking through cars carefully, with the intent to steal one. I couldn't recall how many cars were on the block, but I counted 3 full stops until he was at my window, breathing. I froze. There was no more than 1 foot between us. The car encapsulated me as I lay hidden beneath backseat clutter, forming myself into an object, trying my hardest to be unnoticeable, unmoving, and simply not there. "I see you," said a 40-something-year-old man in perverse baby talk. Imagine when you were playing hide and seek and one of your friends tricks you into coming out. He said it in that tone of voice, as if baiting me, like he were questioning whether the clutter in the back seat was just clutter or a person. I didn't want to move or check the window. I remained clutter. Give me an Academy Award. My body reacted by minimizing my breathing so much that I began to feel paralyzed. I dared not look. My eyes fixated on the back of the passenger seat. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard that it shook my body with each throb. He circled around the car. My ears didn't fail me. I heard the steps. I felt like I was part of the car. I could feel him grazing along the trunk as he carefully pressed down on it, as if to test the alarm, as if to test me. I was in the middle of fight or flight. I couldn't do either without elevating danger. I was frozen and hoping to God he was bluffing. He circled the car again. The handle to my right jiggled. He was pulling it multiple times. I see you. Same tone, but more agitated and stressed. More convinced that he was trying to make that clutter move, revealing itself to be of his expectations that it was me. My muscles tensed like a cow before slaughter. That had to be metal against glass. Take a penny right now and tap your window. A crowbar, a knife, a rock, a gun. My eyes fixated on the seat in front of me, never averting my gaze, like he was. I was covered enough to where I couldn't see beyond the seat in front of me. I knew I couldn't see him, but I could feel his eyes resting on top of me. My name is Poker Face. What's your name? The voice changed in a lower, demented, and serious tone. My mind forced a visual, and it wasn't anything human. I'd already accepted my death. I was ready to be shot in the head, ready to take a life-changing bullet, multiple knife wounds, just to make this sleep bearable, not excruciating as you drain me of life. I wouldn't know how to react. My thoughts grew dimmer. I imagined my friend waking up the next morning after a calm night of safe and sound sleep, only to discover my mutilated, defiled, and bloody body hanging outside my car door. It was then I heard nothing but my own heart. What was the person doing now? Just staring at me in the middle of the night? Talking to me or a messy pile in the back seat? Time froze. The footsteps were being swallowed in the distance. Thank God he left. I waited another hour until the sun showed hints of itself, jumped in my front seat, and bolted out of there, wide-eyed and sober.
A couple of years back, I lived for about 1.5 years in Moscow. I was studying Russian and naturally I fell in with a group of my fellow English-Russian students and expats. It didn't do my liver any favors since we went out and sampled the chaotic Moscowite nightlife at least once a week. I'm not a massive party animal and I can't stomach going home in the wee hours of the morning all the time, so often I'd catch the last train home rather than going to the clubs and stay out till 5. A few quick facts for those of you who are not familiar with Moscow. There are some very strange people in the city. Bless Moscow's little cotton socks, I love the place, but there are some proper oddballs. The last train runs at about 1:30 a.m. and unless you catch that, you've got to try your luck with the taxis, or walk, or just wait until the next morning and catch a train with the commuters. I'm a cheapskate, and getting into the metro was always easier and cheaper. The Moscow Metro is legendarily complicated and weirdly organized and intimidating. It's also kind of very creepy at 1 a.m. when for a bustling metropolis outside the city center, there aren't too many people hanging around in the stations. Those big, grand, Stalinist halls totally devoid of anybody else. Bloody freaky, like the setting of some weird dystopian futuristic zombie thing or something, always gave me the heebie-jeebies. I should also add that for some strange reason, Muscovite men seemed to think I was a member of the sex industry all of the goddamn time. This was mainly a problem in the winter months. Maybe because Muscovite women don't risk the minus temperatures at 2 a.m. Just kidding. Maybe just because, I don't know, I spent most of the time dressed like a Scot of the Antarctic and trying not to faceplant on black ice, none of which screams prostitute to most people. So, on to the weirdo. I had been out to the bars with my friends, and since I had planned a big sightseeing the next day, I bailed on going to the clubs and headed home. I had a few friends who lived on the same line, but this night they were all going on a proper night out, so I braved a boring metro ride home alone. Going home started happily, merely drunking, hopping onto the train at Tetralnea. It was quiet, but not too quiet. A couple of merrymakers out and about, but I got a seat in a relatively quiet car and with loads of space, and I kind of zoned out for a few moments. Our antagonist got on at the next stop. He was a big man, heavy set, but also generally huge. And he stood near the doors. I don't know why, I just kind of ended up spacing out in his direction. I was drunk, okay? But I did end up staring a little bit, not paying attention, just waiting for my stop. Gradually though, I noticed he had this pool of pinkish reddish watery stuff collecting in drips around his feet. Like, you know, the Mayo goblin you get in a packet of meat? My brain processed this as blood at first, so I started staring like an idiot, wondering if this man was injured or something. When I looked up, I made embarrassing eye contact and realized two things. The liquid was leaking from his shady battered looking backpack he was carrying. Seriously though, who carries a leaking meat in a backpack? And he was also staring at me. I looked away. He came to sit in the opposite seat from me, still staring. I only had to wait one stop for the station I had to change lines at, but it was the most goddamn uncomfortable wait I've ever had in a long time. He stared at me the whole time with something my brain can't decide whether it was a rape face or a wanna hurt you face, since I was too scared to properly look at him. My station came. I got off the train. Meatman followed, which I shrugged off. Maybe he lives at the same stop, I said to myself. To be sure he wasn't following me because he made me massively uncomfortable, I took a very counterintuitive and convoluted path to the platform I needed to catch the last train from, even at the risk of missing it. Fortunately, this station was quite busy and full of guards for some reason, or I might have freaked out a bit there and then. I genuinely took the most stupid, time-consuming trip to the platform I could think of. I looked over my shoulder a lot. I kid you not, he followed me every step of the way, step after a leaking step. I tried everything to shake this man. When my train arrived, I got into the car, dived off and ran into another, running like a lunatic to avoid missing it. He somehow followed me. I pretended to need to get off at the next stop and he started to follow, but I didn't buy it. All I could think of was, oh my god, I'm going to be killed by the Russian equivalent of the midnight meat train man. This can't be happening. I studiously avoided even looking at him. I didn't want to miss my stop, so I jumped off the train like a crazy person. Again, luck was not on my side, because the asshole must have the reflexes of a cat. My station was one of the ones which was genuinely really quiet, like a freaking tomb. And it creeped me out the best of times. To make it worse, the easiest way home was through one of those convoluted Moscow metro overpasses. I decided to do the most stupid thing and ignore this man, just to go about my business and hope he went away. Halfway through the underpass, this man was still following me with his drippy and his crazed, unconfused eyes and his weird rape murder face, and Dutch courage kicked in. I was pretty spooked by this man, but I was also really pissed off. Suddenly, like really fucked off, what I did next was stupid, but it was a lighthearted end to the story of the scary Moscow metro man. I wouldn't recommend it. It probably doesn't work on anyone but a scary Russian metro lurker. I wouldn't recommend trying it on anything else, for example, bears. Please don't try this on bears. I was really drunk, which is probably why I thought fuck it and decided to do this. Aware that this man was still following me and closing in, and genuinely being very stalky now, I turned around and shouted, "If you don't leave me alone, I will fucking murder you," and other things to the extent of a drunken mix of Russian and English. I kind of had a very special kind of alcohol and fear-fueled temper tantrum which involved jumping and flailing around like a crazy person, swearing and throwing my shoes at him. You know, out of crazy, the crazy. Eventually, I managed to get him to piss off enough to make me get away and put enough distance between us that I managed to lose him. Worth looking like an idiot for, I reckon. I don't know why he was following me, or what was in his goddamn bag. Ugh, that leaking shit. Or why he looked so mad. He might have just been drunk, maybe. And I know my imagination takes me down a dark route when I think about it. Maybe I was lucky to not be found face down in a ditch or something. Maybe he had truly nefarious plans and I made it too much of a hassle to be worth the payoff. Maybe there was something properly nasty in that manky looking backpack. I'll never know, and I don't want to know. On the other hand, he was scared off by my drunken woman waving arms like a helicopter, shouting threats and throwing her shoes around. So maybe he was just mildly creepy and not a threat at all. Again, I'll never know. But that's the story of the Moscow meat man. Hope it wasn't too long.
I grew up in Central Texas. This happened at a large lake in South Texas when I was around 20 years old. My family owns a very small fishing cabin on this lake. The cabin was very secluded. Myself and a group of about 5 other friends had taken to hanging out at the cabin relatively often. The entire lake was very large. 30 square miles, 20,000 surface acres, but our cabin was on an arm of the lake. The water was about 1,500 feet wide from one side to the other in this arm. We also had a pier that jutted out, around 100 feet. One morning, I was up very early by myself. I noticed some movement on the other side of the lake. I had some binoculars with me and gave it a look. It was a doe and her fawn foraging. But what was at their feet? They were standing in a patch of mushrooms. A friend had just given me a dose of magic mushrooms a couple months prior for my birthday. It was an amazing experience. There were cattle that graze across the lake, so I figured it was a possibility these may be magic as well. For those who don't know, these particular fungi grow on cow poop. So, long story short, I paddled over in a kayak, picked a few of them, took them back home and researched them, and when I was more than reasonably sure they were the type I wanted, or at least not poison, I ate them. Stupid, I know. And yes, I thoroughly cut, cleaned, washed, and disinfected them first. They were the real deal. Soon enough, we were making regular trips to pick shrooms. Eventually, we had so many that we started selling them to others. Just friends, mind you. People that we trusted. Eventually, we were going up every Friday night and picking, partying for the weekend, and heading home Sunday morning. We were making great money and having a lot of fun doing it. I'm not trying to glamorize such activity, and actually, such a lifestyle ended up having big consequences by the end. A story in itself. But we were young and dumb at the time. And as time went by, nothing bad happened, and we began feeling safer and safer and taking fewer and fewer precautions. I should say that this was several years ago, and very few people had cell phones. Neither myself nor any of my friends owned one, and even if we had, we most likely wouldn't have had reception out there in those days. A guy we had been selling to wanted a large amount. I'm talking a couple of pounds dried, so we got in the kayaks and paddled across one night. It was so-so picking. A little dry, so not nearly as many as we sometimes found. In order to fill our order request, we were going to have to go to new territory. Let me explain. From our pier where we launched the kayaks, to the left, our arm of the lake continued down about another mile, where it eventually became more of a creek. To the right, it jutted out to a peninsula about a half-mile long, then circled back around in a cove where you could no longer see it and then opened up to the main lake. The beach was clear for about 200 feet, and then it was very thick woods. We cut across the peninsula to get to the beach that was hidden by it. In all the months we had been hunting, we'd never seen anyone on land, just the occasional fishing boat heading out or coming in. We had been looking on the hidden beach for about 40 minutes when my eye caught a reflection from my light in the woods to my left. "You see that?" I said to my friend. "Yeah. What is it?" We walked into the woods to find 2 beaten up and severely dilapidated school buses. They looked as if they'd been there since Jesus' day, and the woods had sorta grown in around them. Someone had made a poor attempt to try to camouflage them with spray paint. I guess I'd caught sight of a piece of the reflective tape, which was surprisingly still a bit reflective. My heart was racing and I was on high alert, but I was also very curious. We walked over and started trying to peer in the windows, but we couldn't see much because of all the tree sap obscuring our view. About that time, my heart leapt out of my chest as what sounded like a muffled chainsaw started up very near the second school bus. But soon enough, we figured out that it was just a small diesel generator inside a Rubbermaid container, buried in the ground that had automatically kicked on. Still, that was enough to convince us that this place was occupied, or at least maintained. We composed ourselves, laughed a little, and decided to leave. We got back to the beach, cut across the small peninsula, and headed for the cluster of reeds where we had stashed our boats. "Hey man, where's our boat?" my friend asked. I became panic-stricken. He saw another patch of reeds down the beach, and he seemed relieved, thinking maybe that this was where we left our boats. But I have a famously impeccable sense of direction, and knew that this was the patch. He seemed to fully believe that we would find our boats at the next patch. Just to humor him, and in case my spidey sense was off tonight, we headed for the next patch 150 feet away. No boats. Now my friend was freaking as well. Then we heard a disembodied voice coming from the tree line. "I assume you motherfuckers are here to rob me?" We see a guy, mid-40s, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, dressed in army fatigues and holding a machete and a billy club. He was quickly and very aggressively walking towards us. He shouted, "I got him over here, Ro." Soon enough, a second guy appeared. He was 18 or 19 and about 6 feet tall, 180 pounds as well. He was also in fatigues. He too was holding a machete and had a shoulder holster meant for a large revolver on, although there was no gun in it. "What the fuck are y'all up to? You stealing shit from us?" the younger guy questioned while snatching our bag of mushrooms off the ground where we had dropped them in fear. "No, we're looking for food," I replied. "Bullshit. Them are cow shit shrooms." He didn't buy the food line. "We should call the sheriff, but we don't need no pigs rootin' here," the young one said. "We'll just deal with it on our own. I guess you realized your boats are out to sea." They both laughed. They had pushed our boats into the lake and the current had carried them away so that all you could see was a distant white dot. We were both terrified and they knew it. For the first time, I could smell whiskey on both their breaths. My friend was getting desperate. "Money. We can give you money. Just let us go and we'll bring you some cash as soon as we get rid of these," he proposed. They laughed again. The older one started talking. "We don't give a shit about money. We take fine care of ourselves. We really don't like you drawing attention to our humble home here," referring to the buses. I think they were squatters. Maybe more. "Tell you what, if one of y'all can swim out and get both boats and bring him back, then we'll let y'all be on your way, as long as you never come back. If you don't think you can do it, well, we'll have to decide where to go from there." I asked my friend what he wanted to do. I decided I would swim for it and bring back both boats, or die trying. That meant my friend would be left alone with the two of them, and we weren't sure if they would hold up on the bargain. I started swimming for it. My arms and legs were on fire. My lungs were tensing to provide enough oxygen. Finally, I reached the boat. The paddle was lodged inside, thankfully. I paddled to the other boat and tied off to tow it. About 10 minutes had elapsed. I began to paddle back to the beach. I finally reached it. The guy told me to get out. I did, reluctantly. I thought they were going to scratch on their end. They told us if they ever caught us there again, it would not work out too well for us, in no uncertain terms. But they let us get in our boats and paddle away. They threw rocks and taunted us while we were in range. I was half expecting them to wait till we were in deep enough water and start shooting with the missing revolver. Luckily, that never happened. We paddled further down so they couldn't see what cabin we went to, and obviously, we never went back. So, creepy father-son squatter duo, I know this was our fault, and I take full responsibility. But y'all are still creepy as fuck. How about we never meet again?
This particular close encounter of mine occurred sometime in 2005. I was somewhere between 11 and 12 years old. My mom had just moved back to her hometown in Kushka, Idaho, a teeny little town with a population of approximately 654. She came across a little cafe called the Idaho Backroads that had a for sale sign in the window. She wandered in and discovered the place was still owned by friends of hers from years back. They were an old couple who were coming up on their retirement age. They were eager to sell, and soon enough my mom was a proud owner of a quaint little cafe. We spruced the place up and reopened in the summer of 2005. It was a mom and pop sort of place called the Idaho Backroads Cafe, located in a small town of the Snake River called Kushka, Idaho. Kushka is pretty much the last stop of Highway 95 if you're heading out to Missoula, Montana. There's a smattering of tiny towns in between, but Kushka tends to get a lot more tourism in the spring and summer months. When my mother bought the backroads, we often ran into touring elderly people, families, lone travelers, and bikers. Our food was decently priced, and to several customers it tasted like home. Well, the cafe was our home, as we had a teeny tiny apartment in the back in which we all lived. My older sister, Talia, lived with my mother full-time at 16. Myself and Sayana lived with her father during the school year until our mom could find a better place to live that suited 3 girls. We were excited to work and lived in a restaurant. Yes, all of us worked in that little cafe, as my mother could only run the restaurant and pay the bills, not hire a full-time staff on the payroll. Like I said, Kushka was a tiny town, and once tourism left, we scrapped by until the next season. As a 12-year-old girl might believe, it was great waiting tables. It actually was. At the time, it was a small blonde girl with gangly limbs and a quick smile. This kept the tips flowing, as little old people find children irresistible and were incredibly generous. I saved my tips for various things a child wants, but mainly I stashed the money away to help pay for school supplies. My mother raised us to be able to take care of ourselves, and that earning your own money for things you wanted was rewarding. Our little apartment in the back was an open room with 2 doors in opposite walls from each other and no windows. A narrow hallway led to a laundry room of sorts, with a stack table unit of washer and dryer, 2 huge freezers, and a linen cupboards. Another section was a ridiculously small bathroom, painted in Pepto pink if I remember correctly. Next was a storage room, with our business, family computer, Windows 98 gateway, our bigger fridge, and a sort of walk-in freezer. Then, one small step away and you were in the kitchen of our eatery. Out back was a gate and pen in which we kept our family dog during restaurant hours. Reggie was just growing out of her puppy stage with her 2 big ears and gangly legs. She was a wolf and German shepherd mix and was starting to grow into all of the muscle of the shepherd while maintaining the look of a wolf. She was a pretty thing, all white, save for the patch of red that ran along her back and tail, but being a grand majority of wolf, she regarded us as all of her pack. One particular day, midsummer, we were all diligently working away when a man came into the restaurant. My sister, Sienna, seated him in a booth and took off to grab a menu, water, and his cutlery. I was working that day as well, and something seemed to be a little off about this gentleman. All I remember about him is dark, shaggy hair, his slumped posture, and more than a week's growth of uneven beard. She set things down, politely smiled, and said she would be back in a jiff to make his order. My mother, who happened to be standing at the till, was eyeing the stranger with an unsettling intensity. My mom, in all of the things she has done in her life, was a correctional officer at a prison for a number of years. She instinctively knew how to spot trouble. She was very wary. As I walked by with an armful of dirty dishes, she squished my shoulder and told me to go take a break. We weren't particularly busy at the time, but it was quite odd for her to ask me to take a break so early in the day. I started to politely protest, but she squeezed my shoulder a little harder this time, and she looked at me in the eyes with that "don't argue, child" look. So I shrugged, dropped my dishes off with Jasper, our dishwasher, hung up my apron, and went outside to check on Reggie. When I walked outside, I left the back door open like I always do. She sat by the gate, fully at attention, with an anxious look to her eyes. I reached out to scratch her ears, which she normally loves, but today she took this almost stoically, looking past me and into the apartment like she wanted to come inside. I could not do that during the business hours unless it was raining, and we put the baby gate on the threshold of the kitchen to keep her from trotting around. I talked to her for a minute or two and turned to go back inside. She let out a whimpering growl and tried to hop the chain link gate after me. I shushed her and told her to stay put, and she reluctantly obeyed the command. Being a clever dog, she would have opened the gate herself, but since she had done this in the past, we had clipped a chain around the gate lashed to the padlock. And even if she was intelligent, she didn't have the thumbs to turn a key. I closed the door and she let out a pained howl, like she needed to come in. I didn't wish to anger my mother by letting Reggie roam free in her eatery, so I firmly closed the door and made my way home. 15 minutes was long enough of a break, and it was nearing noon. Lunch rush was coming. As I approached the kitchen, I heard commotion. I froze on the threshold in mid-stride. Jasper had his back to me and looked extremely tense. This was completely abnormal, and he was a sort of hippie hive and was incredibly laid back. I glanced around him and saw the man from earlier standing in the middle of the seating area screaming at my sister. He was red-faced and completely belligerent, waving his hands threateningly, spit flying everywhere as he loomed over my 13-year-old sister. In a flash, my mom was between them, losing her establishment owner calm look. She had replaced this look seamlessly with the angry mother bear stance. Jasper and an older sibling, Talia, joined her as well, a wall of flesh blocking Sienna from danger. I watched, terrified, in silence. Talia was an intimidating 16-year-old. She often sparred with our mother and her fellow officers for defense training practice. She also played a variety of sports, and despite her short stature, she was pure muscle. The man continued screaming, making absolutely no sense as to what he was so angry about. Quickly, my mother subdued the gentleman, twisting his arms around his back and marching him outside, pushing him across the street to the gas station parking lot. He took a swing at her when she let go of his arm, and she subdued him yet again. I was scared for this man, belligerently as he was, for even attempting at hurting my mom. If she lost her temper with him, things would have gotten deadly. She didn't fuck around with threats towards her children. He waved his hands in surrender, storming off down the street. I scampered away to the apartment before she spotted me and quickly turned on the television, pretending to still be on my break. She came in looking incredibly calm. She scanned the apartment reflexively, her danger bells still going off. "Lisa, we're closing for the afternoon. Come help me break down." This was a command, not from my boss, but from my mother. These were two different people. I jumped up and immediately came out. Talia and Jasper stood together, looking ashen and drawn. Sienna was just barely calm from hysterics. This is not an easy thing for her. She doesn't have the same temperament as my mother. She was a very timid individual. We turned the signs, cleaned the grills, set up for dinner, and my mom hung up a sign on the door saying out until 5 p.m. Everyone went about their jobs in silence. Save for the radio playing, it was an eerie calm. Mom sat in the corner booth with my sister, whose sobs had died down to hiccups. It turns out she had gone to take his order, and hadn't heard something he said. She'd politely beg his pardon and ask if he could please repeat what he'd said. He just went ballistic from there, pushing her with such force that she nearly fell, then just stood there screeching at her. We all calmed ourselves eventually and reopened at 5 that night. Business resumed as usual until around dusk. I saw him stalking down the street again. In this town, you can see the whole stretch of Main Street from beginning to end. I tugged on my mother's sleeve as she walked by me, and she turned to look out the window where I pointed. She stiffened as he approached the building. He didn't come in, he simply walked by, but he turned around immediately as my sister came by and looked at her. She froze and stared. His drawn, hungry face stared right at her, and he leered. He drew a filthy finger across his throat with a significant gesture at my sister. My mother called the police immediately. The deputy, Carlos, responded, as he knew my mother well. They carted the man away, but since there was no proper holding cells in town, they had to let him go with a warning. If he came near our family or restaurant, he would have been taken to jail. We didn't see him again for the remainder of business hours and soon let it go. Things happen sometimes, and we figured he would be gone. Night fell, and we went about our business with cleaning up and shutting down the shop. At night, before we went to bed, one of us always had to take the dog on patrol, as we called it. We would walk Reggie through the entire restaurant, opening every door so she could look in. And I mean it when I say she insisted on checking out everything. We would start in the apartment and work her way out, opening doors for her so she could inspect. Tonight it was my turn, so I followed behind her as she checked under every table and booth, in the bathroom stalls, hallways, and the entire front lobby of the establishment. When she was satisfied with her inspection, she laid by the door of the apartment, and we would then reward her effort with a piece of deli meat or the occasional hamburger patty if we had one left over. Then she'd pad off to the apartment and resume normal dog activity. We all went to bed around 10:30 to 11 p.m. that night. My mom and I shared a bed while Talia had her own, and Sienna slept on the pull-out couch. During the summer, we left the doors open and latched the screen door, one at the top and one at the bottom. Like I said earlier, Reggie was a very clever dog and could figure out how to work things fast, so we doubled up on the latches so she wouldn't go gallivanting around at night. We all quickly went asleep, as we all generally woke up at 4:30 in the morning to start prepping for breakfast when the door opened at 5 a.m. Also, my mother was on Ambien for her sleeping issues, and she slept like a rock. Everything was fine, but I had been woken up a couple of times to Reggie letting out a hair-raising low growl of warning. I figured a cat was outside, and she did not get along with them, so she was carrying them away from our door. I went back to sleep. What seemed to me like just minutes later, I jolted out of bed to Reggie standing in the middle of the room, fur standing on end. I got up, just as my older sister rose from her bed to inspect the problem. It was hard to see as the black alley had no streetlights and the room was dark. Talia took a step away from her bed and Reggie went ballistic. All in that same moment, as I sat watching from my bed confused, she let out a snarl that chills me to this day, fangs bared. I had never seen Reggie react this way before. She was always docile and gentle. Talia calmly approached her and whispers, "Reggie, what's the matter with you?" in a hushed voice, and my mom is fighting her Ambien to awake. As soon as she said something, I hear a man curse under his breath, "Shit!" as if frustrated by the progress of something. Reggie no longer holds back and flies into what I could describe as the scariest thing I've ever seen in my 20 years of life, and lunges a full bore at the screen door. She ripped through the screen in her cage, forcing her upper half through the mesh like it was paper. Now I heard him clearly, cursing and screaming at her dog. Everyone was awake now, scrambling for lights and yelling at each other in confusion. Reggie was caught by the midsection on the screen and struggled so hard to break free that she knocked one of those hinges loose. I heard a snapping noise, like a bear trap on bone, and a man scream. This set our docile family pet into a frothing frenzy. She would kill him, even if she had to drag the whole door down to get him. I heard something drop, and the man cursing as he struggled to break free from the jaws of the fear beast that was our Reggie. My mother reached out the door in slow motion, kicking it open and simultaneously cocking her pistol and taking aim. Somehow she managed to grab Reggie's collar and yank her back and pass her off to my sister, who dragged her into the hallway and locked the door. I heard Reggie's outraged howl coming immediately after Talia locked her in, and it both frightened and comforted me at the same time. This man was gone in the black of night, and Mom closed both apartment doors, locking them. She proceeded to the front of the cafe to call the police. In the morning light, we inspected the door's damage. The man from earlier in the day had come back for his revenge, and was wielding an intimidating looking knife. In his struggle with Reggie, he had dropped it on the welcome mat. He was trying to jimmy the pin from the screen hinges out of the hanging mechanism, and that sound was what alerted the dog. The police canvassed the neighborhood in the early light and found a trail of blood from our back door heading a couple of blocks west until it slowly grew to nothing. Police speculated that the man was in a crouching position where Reggie busted through the screen door and had probably bitten him in the shoulder or arm region. They kept a watch out for a would-be attacker, and they never found him. If we didn't have Reggie, our dog, I'm sure we wouldn't be alive today. Sadly, when my sister married, she took Reggie to live with her out of town. She got out one day and a hunter mistook her for an actual wild wolf and shot her illegally. She was one of the best dogs we've ever had, and I owe my life to her. I only wish she would have lived a happy, full life she deserved and got to live to watch over my niece and nephews.
I grew up in a small coal town in the Appalachian Mountains, on the side of one of the mountains that borders the valley of the town. It was a wonderful place for an outdoorsy kid. We had no immediate neighbors and acres of woods to play in. Above our house was a ridge that ran along the border of the state park, but all the trails and public areas were far in the valley below, separated by a thick forest and plenty of no trespassing signs, so we very rarely had hikers crossing over onto our land. From our house, there was a dirt road that wound up from the mountainside to the top of the ridge, where there stood the remains of a burnt-down cabin. From there, you could follow the ridge to a flat area popular with Dad's hunting friends, one of whom posted a trail cam during the off-season to monitor wildlife activity. We had coyote and the occasional bear, mountain lions that the DEP still refused to acknowledge, bobcats, and a veritable fuck-ton of deer. From there, you could continue up the ridge to a clearing that hosted lots of flat boulders and a giant electrical tower which was fun to climb on. I'd venture up there often with the family's black lab and spend hours reading, climbing, and generally enjoying nature. One early fall day when I was around 13, I headed up there with a backpack full of snacks and a book. I'd taken care to avoid the trail cam, as it was the old film variety and I'd gotten in trouble for inadvertently filling entire rolls of film, goofing off in the area where it was posted. I reached for my favorite rock at the edge of the clearing near the power lines and had just settled down to read when Felicia started to bark and growl rather aggressively. At first, I paid no mind as she loved to chase deer, but this time she didn't bound off into the woods after her quarry. Instead, she stuck next to me, growling at something unseen in the thick tangle of bush and trees on the steep mountainside that faced the park. Now, I'd considered hiking down that way into the park on occasion, but it wasn't easy passage. The area had been cleared years before to install the electrical tower, and in its place had grown a thick mass of briars and weeds. The rocks that made for great climbing at the top of the ridge became difficult obstacles on the steep slopes below. Not to mention, there was a much easier access closer to the park entrance. This way brought you down to an undeveloped area at the very back of the campgrounds that wasn't easily accessible to cars or hikers. So I was taken off guard to see a man fighting his way through the bush from that direction. Nervously, I called out hello and gripped Felicia's collar. She had a tendency to jump on people when she got excited, and I didn't want her to tumble him down the mountain. The man smiled, extracted himself from the thorns, and made his way up the hill to the base of my rock. I don't know if it was Felicia's reaction to him or the rather remote and impassable way he'd come from, but his presence made me uneasy. He seemed normal and friendly enough. He was probably in his mid to late 20s, average height and build, and rather unremarkable looking. No backpack or supplies, but he was dressed as a hiker would be. I didn't like the way he looked at me, although at my young age I couldn't place why it unsettled me. As a grown woman, I can look back and realize he was sizing me up. From his smile, he seemed to be pleased with what he saw. "Hi there, where'd you come from?" He had no trace of an accent, which struck me as odd. Our area has a pretty strong regional accent, and we don't get a lot of outsiders. "I live just down that hill. I was hiking with my dog." "She seems like a nice dog," he told me, with no trace of irony. Felicia was snarling and vibrating with malice, but he seemed unconcerned. "You should have her on a leash, though. Wouldn't want to get in trouble with the park." We put her on a leash when we're down in the park, but this part is our property. No reaction to learning he was essentially trespassing. "Still, you're so close. You don't know who you might run into up here." "No one from the park comes up here," I told him. I was being a bit rude, but I was annoyed that some stranger was telling me what to do with my dog on my property. "I'm from the park," he said, still grinning. "I'm one of the rangers and wanted to see the property. What would you have done if she'd attacked me? You could get in big trouble." At this, I immediately chilled. We only had one ranger, and he was a close friend of the family. This guy was definitely not him. But I was afraid to let on that I knew he was lying, so I dug out Felicia's leash and clipped her, then stood up, slinging my backpack on. "Sorry, we'll let you get on with your hike. I have to get home. Your parents know you're up here?" "Oh yes, they expect me home soon." "Do they come up here often?" "Dad does. He comes up to check the trail cams," I improvised on a whim. This was the first time I saw the friendly stranger's smile falter. Trail cams? Yes, there are lots up here. He and his friend like to hunt. The smile returned, but it was cold this time. "Well, these would make excellent hunting grounds." He took a step towards me and Felicia lunged, nearly yanking the leash out of my hands. I managed to haul her back in time to keep her from tearing the man's smile right off his face. He didn't so much as flinch. "You should head back. Keep a tight hold on that leash now. Maybe I'll see you up here again sometime." "Yeah, maybe," I said, secretly thinking to myself that I'd never fucking step foot in the woods again. "Well, bye." I quickly dragged Felicia away, looking back over my shoulder every now and then. He remained motionless in the spot where I'd left him, staring after me with that same fucking smile. Once he was out of sight, I picked up the pace. Felicia growled over her shoulder a few times, and occasionally I heard branches snap behind me. But glancing back, I saw no sign of him following. I cut across the clearing with the trail cam, not bothering to avoid it in my rush to get away from the stranger. Once we hit the road that led home, I unclipped Felicia from her leash and broke into a jog. She remained by my side until I got home. I didn't mention the strange man to my parents at first, They were worried about me hiking alone, and I didn't want them to forbid it. Furthermore, by the time I'd gotten home, I'd convinced myself that I'd overreacted to the whole thing. He was probably just a hiker and made up the bit about being a ranger to fuck with me since I was giving him attitude. Still, I didn't hike back up to the ridge that week and instead stuck to the woods below my house. At the end of the week, I came home from school to a pissed-off dad, demanding to know if I'd messed with the trail cam. His buddy had come up to collect the film and discovered that the cam had been switched off, with only a few frames taken. At first, I was only concerned with getting in trouble and desperately professed innocence. And then I remembered the stranger. After telling my dad about him, he called the park ranger to ask if there was a new ranger we didn't know about. The ranger said no, but after hearing my story, he told Dad the campground attendant had caught an out-of-stater overnighting in an unauthorized area back behind the campgrounds the previous weekend. He'd assumed the guy was just trying to get out of paying the camping fee. Young guy, they said. Average-looking, very friendly. Apologized for what he said was a mistake, and took off. Shortly afterward, we heard from Dad's buddy with the trail cam. He'd gotten the roll developed, even though there were only a few frames filled up. The last was of me and Felicia cutting across the clearing. Thank God I told the stranger there were multiple cams. I imagine he gave up once he couldn't locate the other ones. My parents have since moved into a nice, snug little neighborhood down in the valley, and I've moved out of town. In my parents' backyard, on the riverbank, there's a mound covered by Easter lilies that marks Felicia's final resting place. The town I grew up in fell into disrepair after it was sold and eventually burned into the ground. No one lives on the property now, but the clearing at the top is still popular with hunters. When I'm home visiting for the holidays, I still like to hike up to the ridge. I wave at all the trail cams, and I always bring a dog.
When I was about 14, I lived in a small town. My dad was there on a temporary assignment. It was the summer of my 8th grade and we were about to move back to the city. I had a friend, Lawrence, who I met at a local middle school. Since my family was leaving in a couple of weeks, she let me stay the night over at Lawrence's house. Lawrence was a cool guy, but always tried to act tougher than he really was. That morning, Lawrence tells me that he found a cave in the woods about 2 miles out and said, "We should go exploring." In my naive 14-year-old mind, I thought this might actually be a great idea. I mean, what is the worst that can happen? So we go to the location. It's pretty far in the woods and very hidden. When we walk in, we discover that other people had been there before. We see beer bottles, potato chip bags, and other convenience store junk. Then, a little further in the cave, we stumbled upon this area. This is when my note meter started jumping. The area had a putrid smell and was lined up with garbage. I saw a few needles, but at the time I didn't really know what they were for. A grocery bag that seemed to be their portable outhouse, and a makeshift bed. Somebody was living there. I know there are homeless people in the area, but I'm on high alert at this point. I saw some other stuff that I later came to realize were sex toys, a ball gag, rope, anal beads, among other things. I am getting nervous at this point. We are in a potentially crazy homeless person's den. Then, the next thing I found was beyond creepy. It looked like a photo album. I picked up the album with one hand and held my flashlight with the other trembling hand. First thing I saw, it looked like vintage photos of a prison. However, then I saw a picture of a pile of bodies. I immediately recognized this as a Holocaust photo because one of them was wearing a star on his uniform. The whole page looked like graphic concentration camp photos. When I tried flipping the page, I noticed the next 2 pages were stuck together. Then I saw some gooey substance. I took a second to register what I was seeing. Keep in mind, I was only 14 at the time.
Then it hit me like a bag of bricks. This man was masturbating to these pictures. I froze in sheer terror because I could never imagine somebody being that fucked up. It's hard to describe the other feeling I had, but it's a feeling you get when you experience something in its purest form. At this point, my note meter jumped from about 9 to 20. I see Lawrence right behind me. Before, I was worried if I told him we needed to leave that he would call me a pussy. At this point, I didn't care. I said, "We need to get out. Now." To my surprise, he simply said, "Good idea." We noped the fuck out of there and didn't stop running until we got home. I realized when we got back to his house, he had a look of pure dread. He didn't tell me what he had found. It was another photo album with pictures of women gagged and bound. There was also a picture of what looked like a child with a badly burnt face. He didn't hear the sound of somebody coughing and moving further down in the cave. I didn't hear it. That is when he came over to me and was about to tell me to run. We finally told his parents later that day. The police were called, but the only thing they found was trash. Naturally, nothing came of it. So, creepy Holocaust burn victim masturbator, let us not meet in this lifetime or the next.
About 2 years ago, my friends and I had found out about an abandoned insane asylum located in Downey, California. Being the curious 17-year-olds that we were, we decided it'd be a good idea to go explore this abandoned facility just to see what we could find inside. So, on a Saturday night, we gathered a few more of our friends and made the drive out to Downey so we could explore the building for ourselves. After about 30 minutes of driving, we arrive in Downey and make our way through the city to where the asylum is located. The closer we get, the shadier and shadier the neighborhoods we are passing through become, and after about another 15 minutes of driving, we arrive at our destination. We park the car, climb through a hole in the fence, and make our way into the building to see what we could find. To be honest, it started out not being too bad. Considering we had about 10 people, we were thinking, what's the worst that could happen? So we meander through the building, looking at all the broken furniture scattered through the rooms, the patient files thrown upon the floor, and we're pretty much just having a great time looking at this weird mental institution. But this is where shit gets weird. As we're walking, we of course had a flashlight pointed down the hallway because the power that was once in this building was and is clearly out. But as we're walking with our flashlight pointed ahead of us, and we come to a corner, we see the adjacent wall of the corner light up from what we assumed was another flashlight. And sure enough, we turn the corner and there's another group of 4 kids. Shady, weird kids. We confront each other and they ask us if we've been to the slide. We politely answer no because we have no idea what they're talking about, and they tell us that we should follow them. Of course, we decline because we're getting weird vibes from these people, and as they're talking amongst themselves, one of the kids comes up to me with, I kid you not, a 6-inch long Bowie knife looking thing. "Isn't this cool? Look what I found," he says as he moves the knife closer to my face. I politely answer what a cool find that is, and we start to back away, telling them we're going to go explore the roof of the building. Surprisingly, they say all right, and they turn the corner and continue on their way. Now that that was out of the way, I'm seriously beginning to feel weird about being in this place, and about how we're definitely not supposed to be here. So at this point, I say fuck it. We need to go to the roof, go down the fire escape, and get the hell out of here. So we make our way to the roof, and we're sitting there plotting our escape. Like I said, people aren't supposed to be in the asylum, so they have a police car stationed at the main gate to make sure no one comes in. So as we're up there, we try and figure out the best path to get out of here without getting noticed by the police. That's when my friend sees a fire escape ladder coming down off this higher portion of the roof. We decide that is probably our best bet, so we grab a small ladder that will be able to boost us up onto this higher portion of the roof. My friend Jonah goes up and immediately turns around so he can help other people out by pulling them up. As I'm getting myself up there, my heart completely fucking sinks. "Jonah, did you not see this when you got up here?" I whisper. "What the fuck are you talking about, man?" he responds. I'm looking forward, and he slowly turns to see what was pretty much our worst fucking nightmare. There's about 15 hooded people sitting in a circle up there surrounding a burning cat or some other dead animal. These motherfuckers are talking in tongues and making noises which seemed satanic. As we're both getting down, we get noticed and they start talking amongst themselves in this weird language, and as soon as we get down, these motherfuckers stand up and start sprinting toward us. I tell everyone to ditch the idea of the fire escape and not to worry about the cop. We need to get out of here. So we start sprinting through this building with this cult in close pursuit behind us. We miraculously make it out of the building and are starting to run across the field to the main gate, and as we're doing so, the cop notices all the commotion, turns on his sirens, and comes driving in. Thank God, he manages to cut off the cult from us, and he starts to chase them as we got away safely. Honestly, I can wholeheartedly say that was the scariest experience of my life. What would we have done if they'd have taken one of our friends? Would we have to go back in and confront them? I don't know. And I'm glad that it didn't happen.
When I was about 8, I lived in a town that is generally classed as a deprived area. I lived with my parents and 2 younger siblings who were toddlers at the time, and my sister, who is about 10 years older, would stay often. We shared a large square of grass with our neighbors to our left as our front garden, and I used to play out with my bike a lot. Next door lived an older couple and their 2 teenage kids. I saw the dad all the time. He used to drive a really old orange car and wear an old-fashioned cap. He never spoke to us or even looked at us and looked sad as well. I would see the son cleaning his car, but I only saw the daughter briefly once or twice over the years that we lived beside him. The only time I ever saw the mother was when she was peering through the windows and curtains. My parents made me aware that she wasn't a nice person, but I wasn't particularly worried, and I would cut across her side of the grass to get to my house on my bike until I saw her watching me. I remember thinking she was a real witch because her face was terrifying. She looked so unkempt with knotted, tangled hair, and her face was just masked with anger. One Sunday morning, the son was cleaning his car and was listening to his radio unreasonably loud at 7 a.m. We had been to a family party the night before, so all the children were still sleeping. My dad came out to ask the boy to turn it down as the children were still sleeping. The boy didn't respond but simply walked into his house. A few moments later, my dad heard shrieking and looked around to see the witch coming for him with a large kitchen knife. My dad is pretty tough and fearless guy, so he must have been really shocked as he ran around to the side of the car while she was trying to slash and lunge at him, screaming all the time. This is when I looked out of my bedroom window and watched them run around the car a couple of times before having a standoff on either side. My dad sent a missile of phlegm and saliva at her over the bonnet and told her that if he had a gun he would shoot her right there on the spot. My older sister came out and stood with her arms crossed watching, not a lot more she could do without being killed. One of the neighbors called the police and the son came outside and ran to his mother, snatching another kitchen knife hidden in her jacket. I thought he was going to join in, but instead he took off down the street where the police chased him and others tackled his mother. They found that the knife she was holding was a knife within a knife, a weapon, not a cooking utensil. The police told my dad that when they searched the house, they found the witch had carved words into the walls inside the entire house, such as kill, murder, die. They also found blood splattered on some of the walls with chunks of hair stuck to it where she had attacked her daughter repeatedly. I found that part distressing. Not only did the young lady have to emotionally deal with the mother's madness, but she also physically suffered regularly. My dad refused to go ahead with charges as he said she clearly had mental problems and would rather she had help instead. We never saw that family again, but the new family who moved in saw many creepy things in the house, and it took him a while to really make sure it was a suitable place for their children to live.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite subreddits, and I've been thinking about posting this story for a while. It's Sunday and I'm bored, so I decided to finally put this on here for you guys to read. Back in 2005, when I was 18, I had just dropped out of high school in Minnesota. It was about halfway through the school year, and I just didn't have the credits I needed to graduate. I had some health problems my junior year and was altogether frustrated with life. I was more concerned with drinking than I was school, so I dropped out and bought a plane ticket and went to live for a while with my cousin and his girlfriend in Washington State. They lived in a town about an hour north of Seattle. I also had some friends that were a year older than me living down in Seattle. I would occasionally drive down to the city to spend a few days with them. You know, go to concerts and things like that. After a particular stint in Seattle, I decided to head back north to my cousin's place. Me, being the financially impaired individual that I was at the time, I left Seattle without $1 to my name. As I'm getting on the road, I notice I'm very low on gas. I figure I can still make it, though. But of course, about 20 miles short of the exit, the car that I'm driving begins to sputter and gasp for more fuel. Lucky for me, I'm coming up on a rest area. So I pull in and go to the payphone to begin to call the very few contacts that I know in that state. I had no money, so I had to call collect. So I get a hold of my cousin, and he happens to be about 3 hours away in his hometown, and drunk no less. No luck there, so I call his girlfriend, and she never answers. Everyone I know in Seattle doesn't own a car, so I'm kind of hosed. My cousin said he was coming home in the morning and could pick me up on his way, though. So it looks like I'm spending the night at this rest stop. So I get settled with my seat reclined and using a hoodie as a blanket. I'm there for about 20 minutes when a van pulls into the rest area. It was one of those Chevy Astro vans. The van parks and out gets your typical creeper. About 5'5", pudgy, balding, thick glasses. Creeper begins walking around the parking area, glancing into all of the parked cars. There were about 3 other cars at the time. He slowly walks right in front of my car and just stares me down for what seems like an hour. At this point, I'm pretty sure my future involves me being referenced in a documentary about serial killers. So Creeper Guy gets back into his van and parks it so he's behind me on the other side of the parking lot. At this point, I'm no longer reclined and relaxed. I'm now sitting quite wide awake and am not taking my eyes off this shithead. I can look into my side view mirror and see him in his side view mirror just staring at my car. This goes on for about 2 hours, and he would occasionally get out of his van and go stand in the woods in the darkness. I could tell he was still watching me because I could see the cherry on his cigarette light up as he would inhale. At this point, I'm pretty on edge and have to piss like crazy. There is no way in hell I'm going to walk into that bathroom with this guy around. I decide to call State Patrol and have them kick this guy out of here. So I ring the State Patrol and tell them the situation. They say they'll send a trooper. So I hang up the phone and am kind of pacing around while keeping my eye on this creepo. After about 30 seconds, the payphone rings. I'm thinking it's State Patrol calling back for some reason. I answer, Hello? You want your dick sucked? Let me suck your dick. What the fuck? Fuck no. I slammed the receiver down. The damn creeper has the payphone number and is calling me from the woods. I'm slightly terrified at this point and kind of frozen, but ready to run 1,000,000 miles an hour if necessary. I've got my eye on the woods. The phone rings again. Can't decide to answer or not. I don't want to miss State Patrol if they're calling for some reason. So I answer silently. Come on, let me suck your dick. Wouldn't want to have to hurt you. I could even give you some money. At this point, this piece of shit has threatened me, so I immediately go into rage mode. I start quickly from my car when I remember there's an axe handle in the back end for situations like this, I suppose. As I'm walking toward the car, the creeper starts out of the woods and is walking towards me. I get to my car, grab the axe handle, and start toward this guy, pointing it at him. Motherfucker, get back in your van and get the fuck out of here, or I'm gonna bash your skull in. He stops in his tracks, stares at me, kind of assessing me. He turns around, gets in his van, and slowly drives away, staring at me. I'm completely shaking due to the adrenaline when the trooper finally arrives. So I tell him the whole story and he takes my information down and he says he can drive me up the highway to the Denny's so I can stay the rest of the night safe there. He asks if we can first go to the other side of the highway to see if the guy has just switched rest areas. I agree. We pull into the rest area and lo and behold, there's the van. The trooper approaches the van and is talking to the guy for about 5 minutes, and I can tell the trooper is giving him the third degree, sticking his finger in his face and raising his voice. The trooper returns and tells me the situation. Apparently, there was nothing he could do to charge the guy at this point in time. Seems odd to me. The guy threatened me and was soliciting sex at a rest stop. The guy didn't have a license. He claimed a friend had dropped him off and he was waiting for him to return. The trooper told him if he was still there when he passed back through, he would be arrested for trespassing. And if he or any other trooper saw him driving, he would be arrested for not having a license. The trooper also told me he had several pairs of binoculars and a large bag of candy in his front seat. So I get dropped at Denny's and my cousin eventually picks me up and I tell him the story. We have a good laugh being able to look back on it. We go back the next day with a can of gas to get my car. End of story, right? Nope. We arrive at my car and there's a note under my wiper. From the damn creeper. It was written in the form of a poem. I couldn't remember it exactly, but it went something like this. You shoulda shut your mouth, you stupid little bitch. Somebody shoulda taught you to never go and snitch. You should go back and get back on mama's tit. It went on for several pages, but I can't remember more. The guy had cut all the brake lines and everything he could underneath the car. We called the troopers again. They came and took the note and took some more information. It wasn't even my car. A friend of mine had been visiting from Minnesota and wanted to buy a car and road trip back to Minnesota. He decided against it and left the car and said I could use it and that he would make plans to get it later. I didn't stay in Washington much longer after that. I spoke to an investigator one more time, but nothing ever came of it, and frankly I don't know why. They knew who the guy was and everything. I was over it and just wanted to move on. For the short time I was in Washington after this, me and my cousin would pull into every rest stop we passed hoping to find this guy. in retrospect. It's a good thing we never saw him again, because we were dead set on seriously hurting him.
So, about 20 minutes ago, my mother came to my room to discuss my little sister's birthday party. She's turning 11 in 2 days, and she noticed that I was reading the Let's Not Meet subreddit. After informing her about the contents of the site, she decided to tell me a story of her own. To start off, it would be wise to note that my mother was born and raised in a place in Russia near the Caucasian mountains called Chechnya. This town was pretty crime-ridden and old-fashioned, known for its eye-for-an-eye policy. Another pretty important piece of information you should know is that my Russian side of the family was very involved with the mob. My great-uncle was one of the leaders of a powerful mob back in the late 60s. I'll ask my mom for his last name, but I think it's pretty well known and it starts with a K. My mom was about 20 when she decided that she would spend her break from medical school near the Black Sea where she'll meet up with some of her friends. She decided she would come a day early to have fun on the beach before meeting up with her friends. However, as she was sunbathing, she fell asleep and woke up with an awful heat stroke to the point that she was gonna faint. She made it to the road and hailed for a cab for a few minutes until a vehicle that looked like one of those really expensive private cars rolled up. I don't know if they're widely known, but they're basically taxis that look like regular cars. Anyway, despite there already being a man inside the car, my mother decided to try her luck, because it was either this or she was going to pass out on the street. They let her in, and it seemed as though everything was going fine until she realized they drove past the hotel where she was staying at. Eventually, they got off the road and started driving into the woods, and that's when my mom kind of realized they probably weren't cab drivers. She had no weapons she could use. She was 5 feet tall and incredibly thin. All she was wearing was a bathing suit and a pullover dress, and she was still ill from the heat stroke, so she decided to use her words instead. I don't know if you know who I am, but I have a very powerful family in Chechnya. You know that if you do anything to me, my family, especially my uncle, will find you and kill you and your parents and any relatives that you have. She just went on and on about her family and Chechnya's customs until the driver stopped the car and confirmed her statements, mentioning he knew some men in the army who knew her uncle and abided by the Chechen culture and the eye for an eye sense. After coming to a silent but mutual agreement, they drove her back to the hotel in complete silence and she never saw them again.
This took place near northern Uganda. Now, northern Uganda has been basically stable for years. Despite all the Kony 2012 nonsense, which here is viewed as exploitative bullshit, things are healing and getting much better. I've visited many times and enjoyed myself, and have many friends who live in the north with zero issues. One weekend, my boyfriend and I were visiting Murchison Falls National Park in the central west of the country. We had spent the afternoon on a game drive and decided to ride back to Kampala, where we live, by going out of the north gate of the park and driving around the park and then back to our city. We're cruising along the smooth blacktop road, thanks China, and having a lovely time. After a while, we come to a car with two men sitting outside of it on the side of the road. My boyfriend has lived in Uganda for a while, and even lived in the north during the worst of the LRA wars, so he's not naive, and his spidey sense wasn't going off. We turn around and ask the guys if they're okay. They said they were fine and just waiting for a friend's car to come grab them. We say goodbye and speed along the road in good spirits. All of a sudden, we come upon a lorry parked on the other side of the road. There's a bunch of shit scattered in the road, and so we slow down to about 10 miles per hour. We come closer and realize it's children's shoes. The lorry isn't filled with children's shoes. It's filled with pallets and crates, but there's a good 15 to 20 pair of shoes scattered near the lorry. Then we see three men. The three men were standing at various parts of the road. Two were in the middle of the road near the shoes, and the other one was on the side of the road, cursing, screaming, and hacking the ground with a machete. He looked like he was hacking at nothing, and the machete was clean, but it was, of course, incredibly unsettling. My boyfriend has his window down, and all of a sudden one of the guys walks up to the car with his hands outstretched in a stop signal. We take one look at his face and are terrified. He has the classic 1,000-mile stare. His eyes are glassy, but he's not stumbling around like he's drunk. He simply looked completely insane. Machete Man is on my side of the car, and my window and locks are secure. But pretty soon, it seems obvious that our choices will be run over the glassy-eyed man or stop. I tell my boyfriend to floor it because fuck it. If he stays in the way, that's his own fault. We know Ugandans and Ugandan culture well, and this shit is not fucking anywhere close to normal or acceptable. Any Ugandan would speed out of there as well. My boyfriend revs it up and glassy-eyed man jumps out of the way. Meanwhile, Machete Man is moving ever closer, and the third guy, who was just standing there, began to move toward the car as well. We weave in between the shoes and sped down the road. Both of us really shaken up. We asked friends and colleagues about it, but nobody had ever heard of this shit before. And if the LRA or another rebel group was attacking in that area, the news would have spread like wildfire. In addition, I have no idea if the two men down the road knew or had anything to do with it, but felt like I should include it for context's sake. We chalked it up to weird shit that happens in Africa, but I shudder to think of what would have happened if our car had been disabled at the time.
When I was in 10th grade, my high school jazz band played 2 sets on a stage at a local fair. We had about half an hour between the sets, so a few of my friends and I decided to go on the ride Gravitron. That's a centrifugal force ride that spins you so fast that you're stuck against the wall. At the last minutes, my friends chickened out, and I was left to hop on alone. The 30-something typical mullet-clad ride operator looked me up and down as I climbed on, and I was not pleased to see that I was the only person inside the fully enclosed ride. Just as Mr. Carney was closing the door, an older man and his grandson hopped on, much to my relief. The ride operator was clearly annoyed, but apparently undeterred on his quest for underage putang. He sat down in the control seat in the middle of the room, turned off the song that was playing, and started blasting Feel Like Making Love by Bad Company as the Gravitron began to spin. Faster and faster it spun as he wangled his tongue lewdly at me while I was pinned to the wall like a helpless insect. The door opened automatically when the ride stopped moving, and the man and his grandson were right next to the door and exited within seconds. The carny rushed between me and the door and started to push it closed before I could escape while trying to push me against the padded wall. I kneed him in the balls as hard as I could and slid under the half door open. I ran back to the stage, and the ensemble had to perform 2 songs without the lead alto sax because I was shaking and crying off to the side. I pulled it together, picked up my horn, and jumped on the 3rd song. When I looked up from my sheet of music, I saw Mr. Creepy Carney standing in the back of the crowd, glaring at me with his arms crossed. He paced angrily back and forth while waiting for the set to end. As the last notes of the song faded out, I ducked back to the guys in the trombone section and hurriedly explained what had happened. They immediately surrounded me and walked away from the stage back to the bus. The carny followed the group, ducking between game trailers and rides, but couldn't get close to me. This was the only creepy experience I've had with carnies, but it was definitely the closest call. Ladies, be careful when getting on rides alone, especially if they are completely enclosed and you could be trapped with a carny who feels like making love. Every time I hear that song, I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach that day at the Gravitron.
To give some explanation and background knowledge for this whole encounter, I was around 15 at the time this occurred. I was camping out in the middle of nowhere with my family and part of my extended family, my aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the oldest kid there in the RV, so you can probably understand how it felt to have no one else to do this stupid shit I did back then with. With a good 2-year gap between me and the inferiors, it was almost like Nirvana when I got to the campground and met the other teenagers. These were all people we knew fairly well from previous camping trips, so it was considered normal to hit it off with them from the start and act like we've known them forever within the hour. Now, my story. My parents trusted me a lot, no lie. I liked my fun, but I liked getting home in time for dinner equally as much. So when I was gone most of the day with other people from the camp, they didn't think much of it. The only rule was that I had to be back at the RV to eat dinner and before 8:30 in the evening. So picture this. Group of 6 teenagers, ages 15 to 16, out in the middle of the woods with no adult supervision for the vast majority of the day. Got a recipe for success right there. But this particular day, we found a neat little deer trail we hadn't found in the 2+ years we'd been there before. On second thought, though, it didn't really seem like a deer trail. It snaked through a really thick part of the underbrush, maybe a foot of clear ground, 3.5 feet clear of branches going upwards. It's a really hard thing to pick out of the brush, unless you're either really looking or know where it is. It was promptly explored, marked with a broken branch outside of the entrance, and quickly forgotten. Except, I remembered this special little tunnel. That night, while we were all eating dinner, one of the adults proposed that we play manhunt out in the woods. At night. Not everyone was totally on board with this idea, but in the grand scheme of things, they were quashed down like autumn leaves. Everyone got a flashlight, and everyone was assigned to a team. For those of you who aren't sure what manhunt is, here's an explanation. Everyone playing is given a flashlight, and they are divided into 2 groups. It's basically like glorified flashlight tag, but there's a catch. As you capture people, you have to correctly identify who they are, and if you can, they join forces with the hunters. The last man standing gets a candy bar or something, whatever's being offered as a prize. That's how we played it anyways. For the first round, I get lumped in with the runners, those who are getting chased by the hunters. We get a 5-minute head start to run, climb a tree, whatever the hell we want to do to evade the hunters. Usually, I'm the one up in the tree, but that never really worked out as being the winning spot. So to try and score a win for once, I decided to play the cat and use one surefire method of escape. And that hiding spot was the rude little path through the thicket. It took most of the head start time to find the damn thing because it was so well hidden and out of the way. As I passed hiding spots, I heard hushed, smothering whispering between siblings who were questioning my actions, like a bird's wings rustling when it's fluffing itself. It should be noted that I have bat hearing. My ears are possibly my greatest asset in this game. But when I'm just reaching the destination, I hear the short blast of the air horn announcing that 5 minutes are up. I swan dove into this little path in the undergrowth, shuffling on my hands and knees until I'm about halfway in, crouching down like some huge malformed quail. The hunters are doing an initial sweep through the trails, looking for obvious hiders and people caught out trying to change spots. When they finally reach me, they reach the dead end and go straight back. I try to readjust myself and crawl further down into the tunnel. I honestly don't know how it happened. But I found an even more hidden path within that one, and accidentally, I dragged my stupid body down the rabbit hole. Except, instead of ending in a dead end, this one ended in a slight hollow. I don't ever want to describe exactly what I found there. I'm sorry, but I just can't. It was a younger-looking woman, naked, covered in lacerations and stab wounds, in the fetal position. Her glassy, glazed eyes seemed to look straight through me. I'm not going any further than that. I was too scared to scream, and I froze there while dark burgundy stains formed on my jeans. I froze there in a pseudo-catatonic position like a marble carving for what felt like hours. And then, I heard someone else coming along that path. Have you ever been so scared that for one moment, one insane moment, you truly consider something incredibly stupid as a viable option to escape? That was one of those times. I let out a short, trembling whimper and started moving. Whoever was on the path stopped, then eagerly started forward again. I could hear their panting, uneven breaths of a man, a horrible marker of whoever it was getting closer and closer to me by the second. By some wondrous, beautiful miracle, he missed the path leading toward the brushy hollow. I heard him moving down past the entrance, dragging something clunky and awkward behind him. I heard clinking noises and the occasional effort to silence the small, sharp noises. I heard a low curse somewhere toward the end of the tunnel, and I blasted out of the undergrowth like a bullet forcing its way out of a barrel. Cracks, crashes, and obnoxious rustling was all around me as I heard the man sharply inhale a breath and begin to move toward me. The hoarse, deep panting was getting closer and closer to me, a testament to how I was too slow at exiting. Somehow, I exploded out of the entrance, got onto my wobbly, half-asleep legs, and started booking it down the trail. The unknown pursuer was close behind me for a bit, but it seemed like he was too exhausted to chase me at the same speed for long. I know everyone loves to rip on the fact that people always trip in horror movies, but in all honesty, tripping is something I am amazed I didn't do. With adrenaline coursing through me at the speed of Usain Bolt, trying to make my jello-like unsteady walking appendages work to move me away from whoever was behind me was like trying to run on water. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached the main trail running back to the camp and sprinted down it screaming bloody murder. Confused faces looked out from the trees, and I think someone called after me. Reaching the camp was easy, but trying to explain why I woke up half the people in the camp and bolted out of the woods at breakneck speed was harder. When I finally choked the words out to explain, I remember a profound, insidious silence throughout the group of adults waiting at the mouth of the trail. I don't really remember a whole lot from that point on. I know the cops were called, and my mother and aunt ran shrieking and wailing along the trail, calling for the other kids to come back to safety. When someone's yelling like that, you don't ignore it. They rounded everyone up in 30 seconds flat and barreled back into the camp. The police found a man out in the woods, creeping along the trail, clutching a knife. A black garbage bag with a plethora of sharp instruments and a saw was found abandoned on the trail, some speckled and smeared with dried blood. I don't think there's really any getting over it. I still have nightmares sometimes of the man chasing me, breathing heavily down the back of my neck, trying to catch me. Sometimes he succeeds.
When I was 18, I spent a lot of time in the Cohuta wilderness. My favorite spot was the set of waterfalls several miles from the nearest parking area. Most visitors just parked in the RV area and swam in the creek right along the gravel road. In the 2 years I hiked those trails, I never saw anybody further in than a half a mile into the trail. Anyway, one Saturday I took my girlfriend to see the waterfalls and she had never seen one in person before. We set off on the trail and not 15 minutes into the walk, she grabbed my arm and got quiet and said she felt like we were being watched. I assured her everything was safe. We continued on, but she could never shake that feeling of being watched. I just figured she wasn't used to the wilderness and was having a bit of trouble adjusting. A couple of hours later, we finally reached the end of the trail and had a picnic at the bottom of the waterfalls. After we finished eating, she tried to check her cell phone for messages and started to panic once she realized we had no service. I explained to her that there was no cell phone reception anywhere around for miles, that we are finally alone and can enjoy the peace and solitude, which of course made her panic. We started heading back almost immediately because she was clearly scared and I couldn't help but smile thinking it was silly. On the way back, I explained to her how many times I had been out there all alone and had never had any problems, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We were about a mile from the falls on the only trail around when I heard something calling from behind. I jumped nearly out of my skin and turned to see a man walking towards us. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder and a heavy beard with his hat tipped low. She took a small step behind me. "What can I do for ya?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. "You guys left your cell phone behind by the falls," he said. I saw a slight grin behind his beard as he looked at my girlfriend. "Okay, thanks for the assist," I said, extending my hand. He shook his head and told me he didn't bring it, and that it was still sitting up there and maybe we should follow him back up there to get it ourselves. We politely declined and made our way back down the trail as quickly as we could, with him following us on the trail several feet behind. He followed us all the way back to our car and she showed me her cell phone when we opened her door. I haven't been back to that particular spot since then.
I've always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that came alive at night and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop off my friend until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as there was no one there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night, but earlier that week I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking," and for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision, and I knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that all my doors were locked and all my windows were up, and I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange, and I was praying for a quick light change before she reached me so I could get out of there, but I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag, and began to tap on it. I nervously looked up at her, and she motioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on that window button and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced and like she was disconnected from the moment. And that made my skin crawl. After a brief debate on whether or not I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and could not give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time, I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me..." At this point, the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." Then she picked up her bag and walked back toward the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed, in my mind, that nothing good happens after dark.
First off, I want everybody to understand that at the time this occurred, I was not living the healthiest of lifestyles. I quit using heroin when I was about 25 and moved to France for about 5 years. This is relevant because it speaks to the mindset at the time of all this occurred, and why I was comfortable taking the absurd risks I took. I was a drug fiend. Anyway, onto the story. When I was 20, I moved to Baltimore to the Eastern Shore thinking the distance would help me migrate my habit. It didn't. I just ended up driving to Baltimore every couple of days and buying several $100s worth of heroin instead of just buying less on a daily basis. In the process, I got to know a lot of odd people, some of them hacks. In Baltimore, a hack is somebody who operates as a cabbie, illegally. Often they take people into the city to pick up their drugs, or just charge half the rate of a legit cab driver. I had met an older guy at Dunkin' Donuts in Dundalk who did this. Now, I wasn't in the habit of using hacks, but one night my ride went down a street the wrong way in front of a police officer, and we were pulled over and searched. It ends up the idiot had brought his stash of pot with him, so we were arrested and sent to a BCDC. God, I was so pissed. Around midnight that night, they released me. It ends up that not only had my friend admitted ownership of the marijuana, but the reason they used to search us was that his license was showing up as suspended. So there I was in the middle of Baltimore City with no ride, nowhere to go, dope sick in the middle of December. As I mentally ran through my list of options, I remembered the hack I had met earlier that week and decided to give him a try. I figured that at the least, if he was still awake, I could pay him to help me cop and drop me off at the Greyhound bus station to wait out the night. Well, I called, and not only was he up and about, but he was also only about a 10-minute drive away from where I was being released. The fact that he was still up and about at 1 in the morning may have given normal people pause. I just assumed he was probably a crackhead, tweaker, or some such. I just wrote it off as luck. Within half an hour he showed up, and I clambered into the long gray sedan just gratefully to be out of the cold and black on the solid ground. Now, to give you an idea of the way this guy came off, the best way I can think to describe him is gray. Everything about him was just gray. His vehicle was a medium dinged up gray, his hair was longish and a deep solid gray, even his pallor seemed gray. I remember he had the face of a postmenopausal woman, sort of jolly if you know what I mean, soft in retrospect. The guy was creepy as all get out, but at the time he just seemed unexceptional. And really, in the drug world, there are so many weird people that you're forced to deal with one on a daily basis that unless somebody comes off as blatantly volatile, you eventually learn to just ignore the crazy. If you don't, you'll drown in it. We managed to cop in Baltimore. There's always somebody out. I asked the guy to take me to the Greyhound station, just wanting to get well and to curl up till I could think about catching the bus. And he just sort of looked at me, looked me down, looked back up, and then asked if I wanted to just go watch TV at his place till the buses began running. Looking back, I remember feeling a bit hesitant, but the man seemed so unexceptional, such non-entity, that I couldn't imagine him being a threat. And I'm being entirely honest, I just wanted a clean, warm place to get it on. I was well beyond dopesick at this point, and my all-consuming thought was just to get straight. Taking my silence of hesitation, I remember telling him not to worry, that he wasn't going to try anything, and that the bus station wasn't the safest place for a tiny female like myself to be hanging out at 2 o'clock in the morning, that he was just trying to help. Well, F me, but I thanked him, said sure, and we proceeded to drive out towards the county. To this day, I'm still not sure what direction we'd even gone in. Just that whatever it was he lived, it was about half an hour outside the city, and that it was not in the woods, but in a heavily wooded area. As we neared his house, he started acting a bit strange, not enough to set off the alarm bells, but still. I'll never forget him saying that either the police chief, or that the county, or the chief's son lived in the same cul-de-sac that he did, that they were friends, and that the guy had helped him out what he termed a few predicaments. The house was right on the lake with a dock in the backyard. I have no idea what county this was in, and no one I've ever tried describing it to has ever been able to pinpoint it either. It was totally alien to me. We pulled to his driveway, and I was shocked to see his house was closer to being a Mac mansion than to the hovel I've assumed it was in for. He would go on to tell me as he parked and we walked up to the door that it had belonged to his mother, who had recently passed away. Here's this ratty little man with a ratty little car and his ratty little clothes, and he's living in an extremely not nice, but expensive house, driving around all day and night for a pocket change, and basically living out of Dunkin' Donuts. I was more than a bit skeptical. When we went inside, the situation became even stranger, but at least more familiar, more in line with what I'd seen this guy so far. The house was covered in two things: dust and knickknacks. And when I say covered, I mean covered. Every square inch of surface space was covered in tacky little porcelain angels and dollar store crap. Shelves, tables, the top of the ginormous old television box, even the kitchen was covered in them. The kitchen itself I only saw for a brief moment, but I'll never forget how even the sink was filled with these things. There were the obligatory dollies that old people seem to have in spades, all of them coated in dust and discolored. I asked where the bathroom was and excused myself to get high. I was getting pretty weirded out at this point, and I just wanted to get straight so I could decide what to do. I did my thing and went back to the living room, which was the first room you walked into when you came out the door. I didn't want to go any deeper into the house. I wanted to take a look at the lock in the door, create an exit strategy, and hope I didn't really need one. That hope was quickly dashed. The first thing the guy did was bring me a glass of water and a handful of pills. Puzzled, I asked him what the pills were for. He said, to sleep. Now, it's 3 AM at this point, and I have to be in the bus station by 6. At most, we have maybe 2 hours before we will be able to leave. I tell him it's not really a good idea, since falling asleep is not really on the agenda, that we don't have any time to take a quick nap. Well, he starts to become pretty insistent that I take the pills. Believe me, if we weren't so out in the middle of nowhere, not to mention it being December and bitter cold, at this point I would have booked. Instead, I sort of laughed and took 2 pills out of his hand, stuck them in my mouth and took a sip of the water, saying, Well, what the hell. Immediately he brightened and shuffled off to get me another glass of water, which I requested. Looking back, I shouldn't have even drank the bloody water. What an idiot I was. I spit out the pills and shoved them in the seat of the sofa. This whole time we had been talking about little things. Baltimore, local politics, music, nothing deep. At this point he starts talking about chemicals, about drugs. Specifically, what sort of drugs will knock somebody out, but not harm them. How much would you need of what for someone, say, tiny like myself? I try to act as if this was an entirely normal conversation fodder. At this point, it seemed to me that my existence depended on my not registering how abnormal this entire situation was. I think my thought process at the time was that I couldn't act as if I knew what was going on, and that I couldn't act as if there was anything strange or alarming occurring. That he would be stupid to let me leave, and let me live if he knew that I knew exactly what was going on. I needed to seem like a non-threat. The whole time we were having this discussion, by the way, the guy kept trying to get behind me. At one point he succeeded and started rubbing my shoulders. I just laughed and said I wasn't a fan of massages and that I needed to run to the bathroom. When I came back, I made sure to sit on the sofa that was against the wall. And I'm looking around for a phone, but I didn't want to ask him for one, because I don't want him to know that my cell phone is dead. Yeah, another great stroke of luck. My cell phone had died about 5 minutes I had called a creep to come pick me up. Now, this whole time, the guy has been pacing around the living room, sitting for a few minutes only to get back up again, walk back and forth a bit, sit back down. He had begun talking about his mother, how she collected these knickknacks, how she died of a heart attack, and how she had been thinking about renovating the whole house, but hadn't had the heart to make any changes to it. So he says he wants to show me the upstairs. Why I didn't run screaming out of that place, I don't know. I think part of me was still very much hoping that I was misreading the situation, that the guy was just lonely and creepy and socially maladaptive, not actually dangerous or anything. But here we have yet one more horror film trope coming into play. Creepy obsession with mother and bizarre dust-filled house perfectly preserved in memory of mom. Down to the last glass she used still sitting on the kitchen table. I shit you not. And now the guy wants to show me upstairs. He wants to show me her room. So I followed him upstairs. At first he makes it obvious that he wants me to go up before him. We made it to the second story and turned off down this hallway, and he opens the first door on the left. He goes in. I'm half expecting to see the body of his dead mom lying on bed or something, and I find myself seriously relieved when I find myself standing in just one more dust-coated room full of crap. I don't remember much about the room. I remember the bed was made and that I couldn't tell if the comforter was dark or just covered in so much dust that it appeared that way. He gestured to me to sit down. I obliged. What followed was the worst experience. He sat down on the end of the bed next to me and began talking about his mother. After a bit, he looked at me and said, "You're beautiful. You look like a little girl. I bet little girls really like you." I try to lead the conversation back to his mom. He gets up and walks over to the far wall of the room, starts referring to our earlier conversation about drugs and knocking somebody out. He asks me what I would use to keep a child knocked out for long periods of time, safely. I'm trying at this point to act as if I'm still on point, as if I'm not finding this line of conversation to be dreadful, creepy, and horrible. I tell him I don't really know, I'm just a dope fiend, not a chemist. He asks about heroin, and if that would be safe. At this point, I've just had it, and I think he can tell. He says, "I want to show you something." I begin to protest, to tell him that I have to use the restroom, but he insists. He pushes on the cheap wood paneling in the wall, and a large square swings open. He gestures inside and says he's been working on it for a few years, that it's just big enough for a small woman, but made for a child. It's a sort of cot and there's loops on the ends, for rope or some other sort of restraints, I'm sure. I noped out of the bedroom, down the stairs. I didn't run, I just told him I had to go to the restroom again. While I'm walking, shaking down the stairs, I pull my cell phone out of my purse and mimic dialing on it. I was lucky that he stayed behind to close up the bedroom, so he didn't see that my phone wasn't even turning on. I pretended to be having a conversation with a friend of mine, and at the point that he showed up, began loudly recounting what had transpired that evening to my friend. I told him how I'd called the nice gentleman we had met at the Dunkin' Donuts to pick me up, and that I was at the guy's house but would be leaving shortly. I then pretended that my friend had offered to come pick me up from the bus stop, and in one respect I was lucky. The guy knew I was living out of town and he didn't know I was living 4 hours away, and that the friend of mine would have to make that hellishly long trip if they were going to pick me up. I told my friend that I would head out to the bus station as soon as possible and that I would see him soon. I still remember the look on the guy's face as I said that. It darkened. You know the look that snotty, spoiled little kids will get when somebody actually dares to tell them no? It was like that. It was that look, but worse, because there was something almost perverse about seeing it so openly displayed on the face of a 50-something-year-old man. So I started to grab my purse and zip up my coat, all while gibbering on about how my friend remembered him and had said to tell him hi. It seemed at the time that there were two things that were for utmost importance at that moment. The first was to make him feel that I had not found him or anything he had said or displayed odd. I didn't want him to think that I would be some sort of threat to his plans or his well-being if he let me leave. Secondly, I wanted him to know that he was identifiable and that someone, at least someone who could identify him, knew I was with him. This is pretty much the end of the story, although I had one more. Far worse encounter with the same guy a couple of weeks after this incident. He took me to the bus station and acted shady the entire time we were driving there. The second encounter convinced me that not only was I lucky to be alive, but that I had spent several hours in home with a serial killer. Do I think he had done anything yet at the time I spent that terrifying early morning at his home? No, I think he was just gearing up to it though. And by the second brief encounter I had with the guy, I'm positive he had. And I don't know how to put it. That uncertainty he displayed with me was gone. I think by that point he'd crossed the line.
So the other night around 2:30 a.m., I was at my house alone when I decided to take a break from playing guitar and have a smoke before bed. I grabbed a cigarette and started out my front door. About 3 or so minutes into my cig, I noticed this faint noise of what sounds like an old creaky metal object that needs to be oiled. But the sound has a cadence which makes it repeat every 2 or 3 seconds. After this happens for about 10 seconds, I notice that I can hear tires gripping the road as well. Then, out of nowhere, I see a man who looks to be in his mid-40s riding this horribly beaten-down bike that emitted a very intense, ear-piercing, high-pitched squeak every time he pedaled. As I stood in my driveway and he passed me, he kept moving forward, but his head slowly rotated left and he locked eyes with me. I'm not kidding when I say that this guy looked identical to Hannibal Lecter from the movies. But that's not what made my heart drop. As I'm locking eyes with him and he's moving past my driveway, he suddenly gives me the scariest, most widest, jagged-toothed smile I've ever seen in my life, and continues to lock eyes with me. And this wasn't an ordinary smile. I'm talking a when the Grinch stole Christmas, ear-to-ear smile. Within 15 more seconds, he continues pedaling and is out of sight. I can now just faintly hear his bicycle gears squeaking. At this point, I'm wondering whether or not he's going around my rectangular block of a neighborhood, and whether or not I can chafe this cig fast enough to get inside the house before he comes around again. As I'm doing this, I begin to hear the metal creak noise, but I also hear something different. I hear the dude laughing like a fucking maniac, which made me nope the hell out of there. As I'm stumbling from my door handle, he begins to round the turn where my door is almost in view. At the exact moment where I would have become visible, I got my door open, ran in, and slammed it shut. No sooner does my door close do I hear the man from outside scream, as loud as can be, "Where'd you go?" At this point, I went into full-out battle mode, ran around my house and turned all the lights off, battle crawled to my bedroom, and waited. As I lay in bed for the next 30 minutes, I would hear the squeaking of the bike for about 30 seconds every 3 to 4 minutes. About 45 minutes later, it finally stopped, and the man was gone. I've actually quit smoking since then, and haven't been outside that late. But every now and then, around 2:30 a.m., I can still hear the squeaking from the bicycle outside my bedroom window.
Back in my early 20s, I moved to Melbourne to a university. I somehow wound up as to go buy for drugs with my classmates. I fucking hated the reputation, but maybe I felt a little bit cool at the time. Ecstasy and speed mostly. I was at the bottom of the drug dealer food chain, the type of idiot who jacks up the price $10 a pill so he can make enough money to drink at a party. I had no guilt in ripping these people off. They were mostly rich kids who lived with their parents and didn't have to have a job to support themselves through university. Dealing them drugs was easy and non-threatening. A few years after I finished university, I was working an office job that was boring and paid peanuts. By now, my friends and I had pretty much grown out of the desire to take drugs on weekends. My drug dealing ways had well and truly finished, or so I thought. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I just got home from a draining day at work and was exhausted and in a bad mood. I plunked myself on the couch and stared at the ceiling, trying to muster up the energy to get up and shower before bed. My phone starts flashing and vibrating on the coffee table next to me. I looked at the caller ID and it was T-Bone, the nickname of a guy who I'd met at a festival several years ago and ended up spending a bit more time with him here and there. He was a huge, friendly, weed-smoking, acid-tripping hipster with an impressive beard. I hadn't spoken to this guy in well over a year, so when I saw his caller ID on my phone, I immediately thought, he needs drugs. I answered, and we exchanged some pleasantries, and then I could hear the tone of his voice change to that awkwardly, "Hey, could I ask you for a favor?" tone. He wanted drugs, and lots of them, 2,000 worth to be precise. When I asked him what specifically he wanted, he just said as many ECCYs and bags of speed as that can get, he laughed. This was way outside my comfort zone, and even when I was dealing back in university, 10 pills was usually the maximum I would offload to anyone at the time. It was late, I was tired, but I was also broke and figured I could clear an easy $500 after purchasing from one of my guys I used to buy from. I told T-Bone that I would call him back and see what I could do. To my surprise, the first person I called was Stover, and he was able to help me out, and he was only about a 5-minute drive away from me. We discussed the terms and conditions, which seemed reasonable, 60 E's and 3 grams of speed for about 1,500. I called T-Bone, and he was happy to part with $2,000 of this amount. I met Stover out in front of his luxurious apartment building. We had a quick chat and he joked about wanting to meet the guy I'm selling to. We shook hands and was on my way to T-Bone. I asked T-Bone where he wanted to meet and he told me where I was. I Google mapped the address and it was a 40-minute away drive from me. Had I known it was this far away, I probably wouldn't have agreed to sell him anything, but I couldn't go back now. The address he gave me was in what is probably the worst of neighborhoods in Australia, known for its violent crimes, murder, and of course the drug dealing. For anyone reading this outside of Australia, they certainly don't show the shithole in the tourist brochures. I also won't mention the name of the place because I don't wish to offend anybody in reading this that might live there. I started the journey. I now had plenty of time to think about how stupid I was. I had a ridiculously amount of illegal drugs on me and was driving out to one of the roughest neighborhoods in the country. After ages of sitting on the freeway, I took the exit and was approaching my destination. At this point, I was so tired that I was in an almost dreamlike state. Every set of lights I pulled up to, people in the cars next to me would give me the greasy look, trying to act hard and start a confrontation. I pulled onto the street where the house was. "Your destination is on your left," my phone told me. The street was so dark because the street lights were out and there was cloud cover, so no moon. The houses in the street looked dilapidated and abandoned. This didn't feel right. The house that T-Bone said he was at had boarded up windows with shady graffiti tags on them and there weren't lights on, for fuck's sake. I redialed and thought it was about to ring when he suddenly picked up. As soon as I got to T-Bone's house, I told him I was outside, but he asked me to go in. But I said no, please come out to the car. He agreed and hung up. I was thinking, shit, I hardly know this guy. He had been to a few parties I went to. We hung out, but I didn't really know anything about him. I saw him emerge from the side of the house, pushing through the bushes that blocked the pathway. I was the only car parked on that street. He saw me and gestured for me to come over. I had no idea who he was with, so I thought it was time to get into character. I took my jacket off and was only wearing a white singlet and put on my filthy black trucker cap on. I was hoping this would help me look a bit more don't fuck with me. My friends often joke about how I look way tougher than I am. I had some football and kickboxing induced facial scars combined with a pretty large physique from smashing weights for years. I was big enough and scary looking enough to be intimidating. But truth be known, I'm really a fucking marshmallow who avoids confrontations. I shook hands with T-Bone in the front yard of his place. I felt at ease when he gave me a happy greeting and thanked me for coming out this way. He told me to follow him and went through the bushes around the back of his place. I could hear music. Sounds like they were pumping dubstep through the shitty distorted speakers. I could hear a few people's voices and I could smell cigarette smoke. T-Bone ripped the back door open and the smell and sound just hit me even harder. I'd been to some nasty house parties, but this was just horrific. There were about 3 of them in the kitchen. There was a flashlight attached by a string to the 12-foot ceiling swinging back and forth slowly pendulum style. This was the only lighting. The swinging light made it difficult to see the people in the kitchen, but with each swing I would catch a glimpse of their faces. They were absolute toothless junkies, all shirtless, skinny with bat tattoos. We entered the kitchen and one of them closed the door behind us as he stood in front with his arms folded as he was guarding it. One of them came forward and told me that his name was Jay. Not like he was introducing himself, it was more of a statement. His face was full-blown meth-fucked. He sized me up and looked at T-Bone and said, "I thought you fucking said he was some fucking pussy cunt." T-Bone looked at him in total shock. As Jay turned to T-Bone, the flashlight swung past and I noticed the man was holding a big screwdriver behind his back. Now, I realized what was happening and I felt like a complete idiot. I walked into a fucking ambush. Get a guy with a shitload of drugs to come around and rob him. Fuck. Jay turned back to me. He was about 6 feet away from me. He showed me the screwdriver and said, "What do you got for me?" With a big front teeth missing smile. The fact that I was so tired and pissed off kinda worked for me because I didn't show I was shitting myself. I squared up to him and said in a no-nonsense tone, "Give me the cash and I'll show you." To which Jay replied, "Nah, cunt, didn't T-Bone told you these were on tick, mate?" I looked at T-Bone, who looked back at me and shook his head and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Jay looked at me with such hatred. If it wasn't so dark in this shithole, he could have easily seen my overinflated pocket where the drugs were stashed in an envelope. I looked at the guy in front of the door, and as soon as our eyes met, he put his arms over the door handle, confirming that he wasn't going to let me leave. We all stood there trading glances. The swinging light made everyone's shadows look like they were moving. Jay didn't like this. T-Bone broke the silence and said, "Jay, just chill the fuck out, I'll get the money," and then left the kitchen. I thought he was going to bail on me because seriously, who has $2,000 in cash just laying around? Jay slowly came towards me pointing the screwdriver at me. He said in a raspy, matter-of-fact tone, "I'll fucking kill ya." "That's cute," I replied. Then, the painful anger came back into his face. I've never seen anything like it. I slowly put my feet into the fight stance to prepare myself for what was about to happen. T-Bone walked back in and said, "Here's the cash," which briefly diffused the situation. I did a quick count. There was $1,700. Close enough. I threw the envelope of gear to Jay and the door guard moved out of the way and I got the fuck out of there. T-Bone followed me and he tried to give me an apology. "Man, I had no fucking idea the shit was about to happen. I'm so sorry. I just said you owe me $300 and drove away. I never got the extra $300 and I never dealt drugs again." I also thankfully never met Jay again.
I'm telling this story for the first time, and I've never told it to anyone before. Not even my parents, as it would have just freaked them out. This happened 40 years ago, when I was 5, so I didn't understand the danger. I just thought he was a very nice man. We lived in a small seaside town. I was in kindergarten, and my school was about 5 blocks from our house. Back then, all the little kids played outside, and yes, even walked to school by themselves or with friends. I remember you weren't allowed to ride your bike to school until you were in 1st grade. That was the rule, but I have no idea why. My school had 2 kindergarten sessions, and I went to the morning to about noon class every day. Well, one day after class, I went out to the buses to look for my friend Jimmy, but The buses were just pulling away. A blonde-haired man came up to me and said that my mother asked him to give me a ride. I remember he also had tan pants on. I can't recall his face, but he was just average. That's all I can really say. We got into his little car, and thinking back for so long, I remember it being a tiny little Datsun, or maybe a Toyota two-door. He took me to Dairy Queen. Being from a large family that couldn't afford to go out to eat, I was very excited. I even recall looking across the car at the lady in the drive-thru, anticipating my ice cream cone. When the man in the car handed me my ice cream, he said in a childlike voice, "One for you, and one for me." We sat in the parking lot finishing our cones. Then he dropped me off at the dry cleaners near the school, and I walked home. Thinking back, I don't know what his intentions were. He did ask me some mundane questions, one being if I had a dog and stuff like that. I would like to think he was some guy whose son died, but the opposite is probably true. That he was a perv who lost his nerve to harm me.
My boyfriend works night shifts, so he tends to come home somewhere after 1 a.m. Our nightly routine includes me staying up waiting for him to get home safely. We'll then tell each other about our day over a blunt, watch movies, and cuddle until we fall back asleep. One night, I randomly woke up and just felt like things were off. I laid on my side and just stared at the wall for a minute until I processed what had woken me up. Someone was up and moving. My first thought was that my boyfriend was getting home from work, but I quickly remembered we had already gone through our nightly routine. Maybe he's just going to the bathroom. So I sat up, looked over, and there's my boyfriend. Only he's not on his way to or returning from the bathroom. He was just standing there, butt-ass naked, with the closet door wide open, just staring into the closet. He had his back to me, so I couldn't actually see his face, but I could only imagine a blank stare. I felt like I was watching him stand there for quite some time. I don't know what to do. Should I ask him what he's doing? Should I approach him? What the hell is he doing? Suddenly, my attention was drawn elsewhere. Something was in bed with me, and it was moving. I quickly looked down beside me. My heart sank. My hands were starting to sweat. I felt panic rush over me. I was too busy trying to figure out what my boyfriend was doing in the closet to realize that my boyfriend was actually cuddled up beside me in bed. I brought my attention back up to the naked man in the room. I didn't even have time to ask myself who the hell this guy was before he seemed to snap right out of his trance, bolted right out of the room and out of the apartment. I managed to get out a "what the fuck" as I stared down into the dark hallway and heard the thud of the apartment building door slam. My boyfriend then wakes up, looks around, and then hands me the covers. I don't know why I didn't tell my boyfriend right then and there. Maybe it was because he fell back asleep. I didn't want my boyfriend to confront some crazy guy. Maybe I'm crazy. I sank back in bed to tell myself that I was still high and was just having some weird-ass dream. Eventually, I drifted back off to sleep. The next morning, I told my boyfriend all about it and I asked if he had any recollection of it. All he remembered was me saying "what the fuck" and him thinking I was just bitching about him hugging the covers. He thought I was just crazy when he heard this story. I was telling his roommate about it when she got home later from work that day. She thought I was crazy too until I mentioned the guy ran out of the apartment. When I mentioned that part, she started to believe me, seeing as how she found the apartment door open that morning. Turns out she had a friend over that night and they were pretty shit-faced. Apparently he sleepwalks when he's shit-faced. Mystery solved, but I still had this shit scared out of me and questioned my sanity.
Okay, so I woke up this morning and saw the spooky, scary thread and saw that I missed it. Someone mentioned let's not meet, and I decided I would tell my story here. So I was out of town for a wedding that I was supposed to DJ, and I brought a FWB along. She was down to be my date, plus we could have some fun. This town we were in was accessible by a ferry, or a military-grade off-terrain vehicle. Where we happened to stay was a little secluded, but otherwise really nice. My friend had this cabin on the water, and he let us stay there for the weekend. So fast forward through the wedding. Music was good, drinks were good, people were great. So we take off back to the cabin around 2 a.m. Here's where shit gets creepy. As we're pulling up to the cabin down a not-so-long driveway, the motion sensor light on the patio turns on. Okay, what the hell? Must be a small animal, right? We were in the woods, so why not? We were both being cautious as we were very awake about what just happened, so I told the girl to go inside and get ready upstairs, and that I'd be up in a minute or two. I wanted to see if anything that wasn't a small animal had set that light off. I set about around the house to see what was probably rummaging through the garbage or doing whatever a scavenger does, because that's all I wanted it to be. A hungry raccoon, a friendly squirrel, something like that. No, nothing like that at all. I'm standing about 20 feet away from the patio. The light is off now, and I see my girl moving around inside. That's when I notice a man lying down on the patio deck, looking into the house and watching her. A creepy-looking man. Around 6-footish, and he looked like he was probably 68, but was really 35. He looked like a drug addict. Holy shit. I texted Lauren that she needs to go upstairs and give the cops a call. There is a man outside the house, and he's laying on the porch watching you in the kitchen. She simply said okay and made her way upstairs. At this point, the man gets up. The light goes on again, and I had to hide behind a tree. I don't know why I didn't just scream out to scare him. I should have done that. Instead, I wait as I watch this man make his way around to the front of the cabin. To the front door. That's definitely unlocked, because I was coming in right behind her. I watch as he opens that door and makes his way inside the house. At this point, I realize that something bad is going to happen if I don't make my move. The police were called but weren't there yet, and I had maybe 30 seconds to act. I busted through that front door and booked it up the stairs, where I found this creepy as fuck dude trying to get into the bedroom. Lauren is crying, scared, and I'm furiously mad. At this point in the story, I taught this guy a lesson whilst being scared shitless myself. He straight up charged me. A few things you need to know about me. I'm 6'4" and 273 pounds. I wrestled on the high school team, and I keep up with the wrestling, as well as a bit of boxing. I had at least 100 pounds on this guy. I could tell you that I put him in a Kimura lock and then flipped him over and beat his face in, or I caught him in his tackle and threw him over the wall, but nope. Where we were situated at the top of the stairs, there was a railing behind us overlooking the downstairs. He went to spear me, and I just suplexed him over the railing. When it was all said and done, the cops showed up about 5 minutes later and arrested him. Turns out that he was wanted for robbery and home invasions. They asked me what happened to him, as he had a broken leg and what they thought were some fractured ribs. I just told them he charged me, and he ended up falling down the stairs. Admittedly, though, I didn't just toss him over the railing and leave it at that. But the officer asking me looked at the mess from the scuffle, laughed, and walked away. Needless to say, we didn't stay there for the rest of that night. If you liked this video, you should like, comment, and subscribe, and if you have any scary stories, send them my way and maybe I'll read them in the next installment. Keep it spooky.